Prelude. On a windy night in the late summer, Chad and his wife Abby were sailing up the Willamette River toward downtown Portland, where they planned to moor for the weekend on the transient docks, when Chad wrecked their sailboat and nearly killed Abby in the process. Abby was down in the cabin talking on her cell phone to her parents in hushed tones. Chad was at the helm, steering with the tiller balanced between his knees while keeping tension on the 3 lines he held in his hands. The winds were strong. The port jib sheet got hung up in the bow pulpit, and the jib halyard caught on something at the top of the mast, so the sail was stuck and catching too much wind at the wrong angle. The wind began to spin the boat around in circles, no matter where Chad tried to point the bow. Even against the river current, the wind was pushing the vessel downwind toward a low-hanging railroad bridge. Abby climbed up the steps from inside the boat, struggling for balance, and called out over the rush of wind. "What the heck are you doing?" "Abby, please, I've got to get the engine going. Can you grab the tiller?" Chad turned the key near the throttle, and the starter whirred over and over. The engine wouldn't turn. The starter was slowing down. "Here," shouted Chad. "Grab the tiller and swish it back and forth. We've got to get the boat moving forward in the water so we can stop spinning." Abby nodded and grabbed the long shaft of wood that attached to the rudder. Chad turned the key. The starter wound once, slowly, and came to a stop. He turned the key again. Nothing. The horizon spun by. He turned his head to follow it in the dark. The railroad bridge drew nearer. He rested a hand on Abby's shoulder and spoke into her ear. His voice was too loud and too close. She recoiled. "Sorry," he said, and tried again, lowering his voice. "I'm going to get on the CB radio and try to get a hold of the bridge operator to tell him to raise the bridge." "The mast is too tall, isn't it?" she asked. Chad shook his head. "No." He rubbed her shoulder lightly. "We'll be all right." Hopping down into the cabin, he switched on the radio and rolled the volume dial up and down. He pressed the receiver button rapidly several times. No sound. He spoke into the receiver. "Burlington Northern Railroad Bridge, 5.1. This is the sailing vessel approaching from downstream." He let go of the receiver button. Nothing. Of course, the batteries were dead now. He'd worn them down trying to get the engine started. Chad murmured, "Well, we're screwed." He tried the receiver again. Maybe there was just enough power for him to be heard, even though he couldn't hear anything on the line. It was stupid, he knew, but he pressed the receiver button and spoke anyway. "Railroad Bridge, if you can hear me, I'm requesting that you raise the bridge span. We're adrift, and we're fucked. Do you read me? Fucked!" Chad let the receiver drop to the cabin floor. He looked at Abby through the hatch door to see if she had maybe heard what he was saying, but she was looking toward the bow and manning the tiller. Abby wasn't too fond of cussing. The wind rippled over her light jacket and through her hair as she leaned back and forth to keep her balance. Chad stepped up onto the deck and said, "No radio. The battery's dead." She tilted her face toward the sky. Chad wasn't sure if she was looking up at the bridge or rolling her eyes in exasperation. Then she said, "We might as well try to signal the bridge with a flashlight." "Wait, yeah, there you go. That might actually work. I'll go find it, and the air horn, too." By the time he'd rummaged both out of a storage box in the cabin and climbed back up on deck, he could see the bridge's operations booth in one of the towers. A light was on in the window. Chad shook the pressurized can and pressed down several times. The air horn pierced the wind in sharp blasts. He aimed the flashlight beam at the window above and pressed the horn several more times. A dark form appeared in the window, then faded from view. A deeper horn from the bridge blared through the air and then grew silent. Orange lights came on, blinking at track level. That was when Chad saw the train rolling slowly out onto the bridge, its bright beam of light illuminating the bridge trusses. They were close enough now for Chad to see the sharp, round shadows of bolts on the bridge supports high above them. The bridge didn't rise. More horns clamored, relentless and shrill. Train brakes screeched, but it was too late. The top of the mast struck the bridge deck, rigging snapped, and the mast moaned and buckled backward, falling toward the cockpit where Abby stood. Chad dove headfirst through the hatch and into the belly of the boat. His arm crunched painfully on the cabin floor. Lines and rigging swished through the air outside, and the mast crashed onto the deck. When Chad pushed himself up and looked out the smashed hole of the hatch, he saw Abby. Her eyes were closed. Half her body was pinned under the mast. Chad half crawled, half climbed out of the cabin with his good arm and tried lifting the mast off her with one arm. It didn't budge. "No, no, no," he yelled over and over. "You motherfucker, please, God, please." He tried getting his good shoulder under the mast and pushing upward with his legs. He tried over and over again, facing away from Abby, trying to lift and push and lean hard and pull and lift so that he wouldn't have to look at her.